Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah, daf kaf. Today's daf is dedicated for Yom HaShoah in memory of all those who died in the Holocaust. And today's daf is sponsored by Caroline Ben Ari in loving memory of her father, Iver Rhodes, Rabbi Meir, and Sarah on his 13th yahrzeit. Dad was hardworking, caring, and generous and honest to a fault, with a wicked sense of humor and a lifelong addiction to puns. Today, I pledge to make as many terrible puns as I can in his honor. Okay, we're going to get started from the top of our daf with a contradiction in Divrei Rabbi Akiva. We saw Rabbi Akiva yesterday. Just to review what we saw in yesterday's daf, we had, number one, a machloka between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis about the issue of the order of how you do the mincha and the drinking. Do you first do the mincha, then you drink? That was Rabbi Shimon. And the rabbis who said, no. First you drink, then you do the mincha. And then we have Rabbi Shimon who said, but if you do it in the opposite order, it could work as well. And we had a big thing about how each one reads the three verses that all refer to the drinking, one before the mincha, one, and then two after the mincha, and how that all works with their opinions. Then within that, we quoted at the top of Yud Tet Amud Bet, this braitot, which had Rabbi Shimon's opinion, and also Rabbi Akiva appeared there. Rabbi Akiva said that basically once we erase the Megillah, there is the point of no return. The woman cannot say, I don't want to drink the water. Until that point, she can say, I don't want to drink the water. Then at the bottom of the daf, we brought a contradiction to what Rabbi Akiva said there from a different braitot, because in that braitot it seems to say, if she says, I don't want to drink, then what more admission is that? And if she admits she's guilty, we obviously don't have her drink the waters, it seems like even if the Megillah has already been erased. So then, because he disagrees with Rabbi Yehuda, who says once the Megillah is erased, we force her. And Rabbi Akiva said no. If she says no, she's obviously admitting that she's guilty. To which we then said, but even Rabbi Akiva himself, later in that same braitot, started saying, well, there are cases where she doesn't have to drink. So that we resolved by distinguishing between a woman who doesn't want to drink out of a place of braitot, which it's hard to exactly define, and we'll see even the Gemara just struggled with it in a minute. We're going to see that. But coming from a place of strength, where if she's coming from a place of strength, we assume she means I'm admitting I'm guilty. Whereas if she's just scared and it's a little scary to drink those waters, and she just gets scared and says, you know what, I'd rather not try to prove my innocence. Let me just get divorced from my husband and be done with it, and I'll lose my ketubah money. But let's just, not do this. And again, how they're figuring this out is a good question. But if she's doing it out of fear, then she's not allowed to change her mind. However, pay close attention. At what point can she not change her mind according to that braitot? So if you look in yesterday's daf toward the end, it said, Ad shelo kara v'kometz yichola lachzor bo. Mi shekara v'kometz eina yichola lachzor bo. Now it says, it all depends, did they bring the meal offering or not? If they didn't offer the meal offering, she could change her mind. Once they did, it's the point of no return. To which the Gemara basically at the top of our daf says, Kasha de Rabbi Akiva de Rabbi Akiva. The first source we saw at the top of Yud Tet Amud Bet said that according to Rabbi Akiva, was all point of no return is after the Megillah is erased. According to this braitot, the point of no return is after the mincha is offered. So that seems to be a contradiction. To which the Gemara says, Trei tanai aliba de Rabbi Akiva. We obviously have two tannaitic traditions about what Rabbi Akiva held. In other words, these sources must have been passed down by a different Tana who held that that's what Rabbi Akiva said. So we basically have a debate within what does Rabbi Akiva himself hold? Does he hold the point of no return is after the erasing of the Megillah, or does he hold it's after the sacrificing of the kmitza, the sacrificing of the meal offering? And then, again, we still have that distinction, though, that he made, which we resolved yesterday, which is that's only if the woman's scared. Then we force her. But if it's not out of fear, but out of a woman who's confident, so I would put it, she's a woman who stands with confidence and says, I'm not drinking, probably, right, the assumption is that's, and I say probably because we're going to see in a minute, they're going to question this a little bit, that's coming from a place of confidence, therefore it must mean she knows she's guilty. So now the Gemara asks, the question was asked, if she says I'm not drinking out of a place of confidence, V'chazra v'amra shotani. But then, whether it's a minute later, 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, an hour later, we don't know how long. But she says, I am going to drink. Or I want to drink the waters. What do we say? Do we say? And here you see that they're not really sure how to determine if a woman is confident and is saying it out of confidence and it means that she's guilty. Because are we going to say the following? Since she says, I'm not drinking, and it was a place of confidence originally, we say she clearly admitted her guilt. And since she already admitted her guilt, and that's, I view it like a mathematical equation. A woman who does it, machmat briyuta, is equal to a confession. It's as if she confessed, in which case there's point of no return. She can't drink the waters anymore because we already know she confessed. Oh, Dilma, or do we say, Kevanda amra shotani, since now she says, I want to drink the water, she changes her mind. And then we assume if she really was guilty and was confessing, she wouldn't be changing her mind here. Gal yadat, then now it's clear now that from before, or perhaps we say it's clear, that's the whole problem, we're not sure. Maybe when she said it earlier, we thought it was from a place of confidence, but maybe really it was from a place of fear, right? Some people are scared and they don't necessarily show it in their face, right? Like this is raising really a question on how are we determining it's machmat briyuta or machmat, what we called it before, ritita, now we're calling it biatuta. Both of them are out of this fear. So how do we know? If the fact that she changes her mind and says all of a sudden, oh, I do want to drink the water, does that prove that retroactively what we thought was briyuta really wasn't? Maybe it was ritita, maybe it was or biatuta, it was out of fear. So the Gemara answers teku, we don't really know, because again, these are things that are dependent on what's inside people, and we don't really know what people are thinking inside. So we could try to assess what we think, but then sometimes we're thrown off and maybe it wasn't the case. So it obviously, besides that it's talking about a very specific case where the woman first said, I'm not drinking out of confidence, and then said, I want to drink the water. Still, what it's really reflecting is, how do we really know how to determine briyuta or not, whether it's briyuta or ritita? Okay, last thing before we get to the next Mishna, Amar Avua de Shmuel. Okay, until now we've talked about you put soil into the water, and then we erase the Megillah into the water. Again, we talked about two possible ways about how you do that. But now the father of Shmuel is going to say not only that, there's something else. The pasuk didn't say explicitly, but implied that this goes in also. You're supposed to put something bitter in the water. You might remember from all the translations that it always calls the water the bitter waters. Now, you might have thought bitter is because maybe it has ink in it. Maybe that makes it bitter. Or bitter is more metaphoric. It's a bitter water because it's going to cause the woman to be killed, possibly. But they say here that pay close note. It says, my time. Well, where do we get it from? You have to read the whole pasuk to understand what they're referring to. It says in the pasuk 23 in chapter 5, in Bamidbar, katavet ha'alah ha'ela ha'kohen basefel. He writes them in a book, right, which means on a piece of parchment. Umacha el me hamarim. And he erases that ink into the bitter waters, which means, according to the Torah, according to the Gemara, they say shemarim kval. They were already bitter before you put the scroll into it. Now, if the scroll is what turns these into waters that are going to destroy the woman, then they should only become the bitter waters. Let's say you understand it figuratively. Then they only become bitter waters once the scroll is in there. But if you put the scroll into the bitter waters, that means they have to have been bitter before. So, and they don't think it's the soil that makes it bitter. So there must be a need to add something else. It doesn't tell you what, but something that makes the waters bitter. New Mishna. Okay, now first of all, we're going to get to some very famous lines in this Mishnah, some very relevant lines to us as women. But before we get there, we're going to see different stages of what happens if the woman changes her mind or admits that she's guilty at different stages. And not only do we allow her to back out of this, but also if we do, what happens to our sanctified mincha offering that she already put in this kli sharet, it's already got sanctity to it. What do we do with the Megillah that's written already that we talked already about a Megillah has to be written lishma for the name of this woman, so we can't throw it out. It's a Torah scroll, right? It's a scroll from, with the name of God in it. On the other hand, right, it can't be used for anyone else. So what do we do with it? So ad shelo nimcheka Megillah, if the Megillah was not erased yet, amra eini shotah, we already know before the Megillah is erased, she could say, I don't want to drink anymore. Megillata nignezet. So what do? We put in the geniza. It's like any kitvei kodesh, right? That's ruined, so to speak. We bury it. Uminchata mitpazeret ala deshen. What do we do with her mincha? We put it on the deshen. What's the deshen? There's actually 3 places called the Beit HaDeshen. They're each meant for different things. But the one that was next to the altar on the floor was this place on the ground there where they would throw anything that was kind of garbage, but garbage, sanctified garbage, okay? Things that can't be used, but can't go on the altar, but they're already sanctified. So that's where we throw this and it gets burned there. The reason why this goes in the azara is because anything that's sanctified, and this is a mincha offering that's supposed to go on the altar, it's considered kodshe kodshim. It's the highest sanctity, so that's burned on the Beit HaDeshen that's in the azara next to the altar. There's other ones that have to be somewhere in Har HaBayit, that's lesser sanctity, and even lesser sanctity in Jerusalem. There was a third one, okay? Different things are burned in the different places. Nimcheka HaMegillah. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. And as I said before, although we're going to see there's a machloket about this, right now we're going with the approach that the Megillah has to be written for this particular woman. So therefore, you can't take that Megillah and use it for any other woman. It's not like you could save it in the temple and say, well, next time we have a Sotah, we'll use it for her. If it was already erased, though, the Megillah, so now that piece of parchment no longer has sanctity to it because all the words of the Torah are erased. And then she says, but we have a different problem, which is we now have waters where we erase the name of God. Now, remember, erase the name of God is really not something we ever want to do. So at that point, if she says, Sme'ani, but what happens here, right? We have 2 options. Either she could say, I don't want to drink, and then we already learned we don't let her, right? That we saw that Rabbi Akiva said it, but then Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis also agree with that. We don't let her. We'll get to that in a minute. But if she now admits her guilt, she doesn't say, I don't want to drink. She says, I'm guilty. At that point, the waters become meaningless because the whole purpose of the waters, Rashi says this, I'm not going to read it inside, but he says the whole purpose of the waters is to determine something that's in doubt, that we don't know what it means, what it is. We don't know, is she guilty, is she not? Once she admits her guilt, we know exactly the waters are meaningless. So what do we do with them? Hamayim nishpachim, we spill them out. It's as if it loses any sanctity it had. And the mincha, again, that was already put in a sanctified vessel, that has sanctity and it gets burned in that same spot in the Beit HaDeshen. But if we erase the Megillah and she says, I'm not going to drink, here's a review. This now, it just appears in the Mishna, what we already saw. We basically force her to do it. According to some people, they say, Hotziua, like, get this woman out of here. So let's just explain before we continue. If she barely finishes drinking, that's what it means. She just finished drinking, and immediately her face starts turning green, her eyes start bulging out of her body, and she starts filling up with sinews. That basically means you start to see, right? They start popping out of her body, start to see them through her skin. The reaction to this is, get her out of here immediately. We don't want the azara to become impure. You have to remember, where is she standing? And this is this is going to be a question later. She's standing outside the azara. She's not in the azara. Remember, the azara is the most sanctified place. That's where the altar is. And then from in there, there's the heichal, the sanctuary, and the kodesh kodeshim. She's standing outside at Shar Nikanor, the Nikanor gate, outside where the Motzaraim stand, if you remember, we had all that. And the people who bring their yoldot, the sacrifices for the women who give birth, etc. So we're going to have to deal with what tumah are we worried about, because we're going to say later, it's not tumah made. It's not that we're worried she's going to die, because there's actually no problem. That's called the machaneh leviyah there. And there's no problem to have a dead body there. We learned that from the Atzmot Yosef. We'll get back to that later today. So they're going to have to understand what tumah exactly are we worried about here. Next thing, Im yesh la zchut hayta tolala. If she has any merits, we saw this already before, then it'll push off her death. She won't die immediately. Yesh zchut tola shana achat, yesh zchut tola shtei shanim, yesh zchut tola shalosh shanim, depending on how many merits she has, how many good deeds this woman's done in her life. She could possibly live a year, she could live 2 years, she could live 3 years. Mikan omer ben Azai, two very, very famous statements, one more famous than the other. From here, Ben Azai says, Hayav adam lelamed bito Torah. A father must teach his daughter Torah. Why? Okay, you're saying, oh, good. Someone's saying you should teach your daughter Torah. We know there's others who say you shouldn't, but it's a bit of a negative way he says why you should teach your daughter Torah. She'im tishteh. What if the woman drinks the Sotah waters? Let's say we have a woman who's guilty, but she goes ahead and drinks the Sotah waters. She doesn't want to admit her guilt. She drinks the Sotah waters in hope that the Sotah waters won't really work. And she drinks them and she doesn't die immediately, right? How many times do people say, oh, look, I did something wrong and I wasn't struck by lightning, right? It's this idea that, oh, it's supposed to happen right away, right? What does she say? Oh, look, I guess the Sotah waters is all baloney, right? It's just a fake. It's not really true. So Ben Azai says, we're worried, we want this woman who might be guilty, who drinks the Sotah waters, who thinks that maybe, right, the zchut will be tolala, and I'm sorry, who doesn't know that the zchut will be tolala, and she's going to start saying, these Sotah waters is nothing. This is silliness. Look at the Torah. The Torah is silly because it doesn't come true what the Torah says is going to happen. But she won't know that it's just because she did some good deeds in her life. So because of that, it's important to teach women Torah, which is interesting, especially if you believe me, which again, I don't have proof for this, but it does seem to me that it was unlikely that the Sotah actually happened. Then on that account, we should teach all women Torah so that we don't get to the scenario where she has married, she doesn't die right away, and she starts to make fun of the whole system. So it's an interesting reason to teach women Torah. According to him, that's why a father should teach his daughter Torah. Here comes the more famous statement, which is Rabbi Eliezer Omer, tiflut. Anyone who teaches his daughter Torah teaches her tiflut. Okay, what is tiflut? Good question. Nobody really knows what tiflut is. Some people say tiflut is he teaches her to promiscuity, teaches her to engage in, in relations that are inappropriate, maybe connected to this, if you explain it that way, because she'll understand that she could cheat on her husband. And the Sotah waters won't affect her because she'll be able to live 1, 2, or 3 years. Again, it's not, she's still going to die from them, but maybe that's what it means. Some people say tiflut is the word tafel, both with a tet and with a taf. It's an interesting word. It means similar things, but something insignificant, silliness. It will teach her she'll misinterpret the Torah. She won't understand it. It'll teach her to, believe that things are permitted that really aren't permitted. Okay, can teach her also, we don't really know what this means, okay? And later, you might see in your text, if you have it, it says ki'ilu in parentheses. Later, the Gemara is going to say, it's not that he really teaches her tiflut, it's ki'ilu lamda tiflut. It's as if he teaches her tiflut, okay? Because it could lead to bad things. Okay, we can't move on without trying to deal with this. How do we grapple with this? We're learning Torah, and it says we shouldn't learn Torah. And in fact, if you look at the commentaries, so the earlier commentary is basically, the Rambam, for example, makes a distinction between Torah shebechtav and Torah shebal peh, okay, that women can learn the written Torah, they can't learn the oral Torah, okay, which is what we're learning. So how do we justify that? Then there's people who distinguish between the Ramah, okay, if we're jumping a few hundred years, the Ramah, on his commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, his notes, he says women can learn things that are relevant to them, and then we can learn halachot that are relevant, but not things that are not relevant. Some people say specifically they should learn emunah, things about belief, okay? And that's important. So how do we justify learning Gemara today? So I'm going to offer 2 directions. There's obviously many things said about this, and this is just a daf Yomi shiur, so we're going to just say them very briefly. But one is that women weren't educated in those days, and therefore there was a concern. First of all, you have to say there's 2 opinions here, by the way. There's Ben Azai and there's Rabbi Eliezer, like who's to say we have to follow Rabbi Eliezer. But, and by the way, some people say this says a father shouldn't teach his daughter Torah, but it doesn't mean a daughter can't learn on her own, like a woman can't learn on her own. So that maybe it's just a father-daughter thing, okay? The father shouldn't teach his daughter, but if the daughter wants to learn on her own, she can. Now, even then, we know, first of all, we know all throughout history, there were women who learned, who were knowledgeable, Bruria, and even the rabbis go to her for questions. And there were women throughout history that were known on an individual level. So again, maybe this is talking on a broad level, but not necessarily to individuals. We take that, we can then take it farther to number one, right? Women are much more educated nowadays. And if they're getting a secular education, it seems crazy. They shouldn't be getting an excellent Jewish education, which would include obviously learning Gemara. And, maybe they weren't as capable intellectually in those days. Or it's possible that the meaning of learning Torah has changed. It could be the Torah in those days. We even have sugyot that Amei Haaretz shouldn't learn Torah. And not all sources say that. But again, there is this idea that in those days, even though when you're learning the Gemara, you feel like everybody was learning, it wasn't true. It was really the elite that were learning. And the women weren't part of that elite. Nowadays, the Torah has changed and is not just for the elite, but really everybody learns Torah. And it could be that the place of Torah in our Jewish lives has changed. And in order to have a meaningful Jewish life, it's very hard to do that without learning Torah. And women are part of that. And what used to be just for the elite is now for everybody. And therefore, women should be part of that no different than anybody else. So it's possible to look at it in some of those different manners. So with that, we will move on. Rabbi Yoshua says, here's a tough statement. If that previous one wasn't tough enough about women, here comes another tough one. He has a statement about women in general. He says, Rotza isha bekav tiflut mitish'a kabinu prishut. I think he's really offering a warning to men, beware of women like who might seduce you. Because he says a woman would rather have one kav of food, a small amount of food, but tiflut, which here he explains tiflut is promiscuity and having sexual relations, mitish'a kabinu prishut, rather than have 9 kabin of food, right? Much more food and abstinence. Women don't like to be abstinent, and therefore, beware of women because they're going after sexual promiscuity. So be careful of women. Maybe he's just warning men from, possible prostitutes or something. I'm not really sure because most women, I don't think you would necessarily say are like this. And then it's interesting because his other next statement, we're really only going to learn and understand better when we get to the next 2 dapim where they discuss what these things mean. But hu haya omer chasid shoteh rasha arum isha prusha umakot prushim harei elu mevalei olam. Let's just focus for a minute on the isha prusha. But a woman who's totally abstinent, that actually causes the world to be destroyed, okay, or the world to be weakened. So on the one hand, he's saying women kind of are, dangerous. On the other hand, a woman who abstains entirely is also not a good thing. And then he talks about this chasid shoteh rasha arum umakot prushim. I'm going to leave, I'm not even going to define them at all right now because the Gemara is going to go into possible definitions for what those things are. And we have a lot to do today, so I'll just leave that for the next 2 days. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mishum Rabbi Meir. So now the Gemara starts off with the statement of Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, quoting Rabbi Meir and saying that Rabbi Meir said the following. And we're going to see 2 different versions of this story, although the Gemara is not going to view them as 2 different versions. The Gemara is going to say these are 2 different sources that totally contradict each other. And can we reconcile them or not? We'll see. So comes Rabbi Meir and he explains, according to Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, Shayiti lamed Torah etzel Rabbi Akiva, hayiti matil kankantum letoch hadyom. When I was learning Torah etzel Rabbi Akiva with Rabbi Akiva, and by the way, flashback this week is all about Rabbi Meir and his life and different things about him, so you can read up about it, and about his wife Bruria, which connects also with our sugya about knowledgeable women. So Rabbi Meir was a scribe. So Rabbi Meir basically says, when I would learn Torah with Rabbi Akiva, I would put this copper sulfate, kankantum, into my ink. Below Amarli Davar, and he didn't complain. We're going to see in a minute. Kankantum will ensure that the ink doesn't erase. So he was a sefer. He was writing sefer Torah, okay, books of Torah, and he made sure he had ink that didn't erase. And Rabbi Akiva seemed to approve of this. But Kishabati, it's a Rabbi Yishmael. But later, when I moved yeshivas, and I went from Rabbi Akiva's yeshiva to Rabbi Yishmael's yeshiva, Amar li b'ni ma malachtecha. So when I came to the yeshiva, he says, what do you do for a living? Right, you see here. Also, Shuli Mishkin points this out in flashback, but the rabbis worked in those days, right? And he had a job. He was a scribe, and he comes. He says, "What's your job?" I work as a scribe. Amarti lo lablarani. I said, "I'm a scribe." Amarli b'ni. He said to me, because remember, this whole thing is being told from the perspective of Rabbi Meir. My son, your job is the work of God. and shema tachsil ot echad or totil ot echad. V'nimtzeta tamacharivet kol haolam kulo. You can cause the destruction of the world by leaving out one letter or adding one letter. You could cause the destruction of the world. Okay, that seems a little bit extreme. How so? Well, let's say you leave out the letter aleph in the word emet. Hashem Elokechem emet. God, right? Hashem, your God, instead of emet is truth, you say is dead. That's not right. That basically says God is dead in, new religion. This is all right. Concerns for Christianity or something, that your God is dead, or, at least your nation is no longer chosen, moving on to something else. Or you can have where it says God did some Breshit bara Elohim, and you add a vav by accident, Breshit bra'o Elohim, in plural, as if there were two gods. That could also lead people to be heretics to say there's two gods. So you have to be concerned about this. Amarti lo, davar echad yesh li shani matil letoch hadyo, v'kan tom shmo. So I said to him, listen, don't worry. I won't mess up because I have this thing that makes sure the words don't get erased. How that exactly answers the question is not so clear. It doesn't really say how you're not going to add an extra letter, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Amarli, so Rabbi Yishmael said to me, what are you doing? You can't put this copper sulfate into the ink to make sure it doesn't erase. The Torah says that the Sotah parsha has to be done in a way that it can be erased. Right? You erase the words, has to be, you write it in a way that it can be erased. Now, this is a little bit strange because we never really imagined that the Sotah text was taken from the Torah and they put that to erase, right? We always assumed, or at least I did, that you take a cloth, a new piece of parchment, and you write those psukim. We had a whole debate which psukim. You put it on a cloth separate from your Torah, not that you take it from your Torah. But from here, we're going to see at least that there's one opinion that you could actually take it from a Torah. I don't know exactly technically how you do that. You would have to cut it out. It would be weird, but maybe you take out that parchment, you cut around the words, and then, you get rid of the other part, and then you put in a new one in its place. It's a little bit weird to think about, practically speaking, but again, this whole thing, practically speaking, maybe never happened anyway, so maybe they're just talking theoretically. But he basically says this is an issue. Okay, now, first the Gemara is going to say, what was Rabbi Shimon worried about, and how did Rabbi Meir answer it? Because he didn't really relate directly to his question. So they don't really say what Rabbi Yishmael asked, but from what Rabbi Meir said, it's going to be clear what Rabbi Yishmael asked him. What he said to him was the following, right? We're in the first stage of Rabbi Yishmael. Your first issue about me adding a letter or erasing or taking out of forgetting a letter, don't worry. I know my stuff. I'm good. I'm not going to make any mistakes in that area. What does the ink have to do with it, though? I'm not even worried that a bee is going to come by. Dalet and Reish in Hebrew, right, have just a little extra thing there. So I'm not even worried that a little bug is going to come and maybe sit right on that little extra part of the Dalet, and it'll come off, and it'll be erased, and it'll turn into a Reish. In other words, that's my point. I use ink that never erases, so you don't have to worry about that. And therefore, he says, and therefore it won't be erased. Okay, so we resolve that. But now the Gemara is going to ask a different question. Is this really true? It says in a different braitot. Now we're going to hear this similar story, but things are going to be a little different. And the main thing is going to be that Rabbi Yishmael is going to be Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva is going to be Rabbi Yishmael. I'm Rabbi Meir. When I first learned Torah by Rabbi Yishmael, and the previous one it was Rabbi Akiva first, Rabbi Yishmael never said anything to me when I put this stuff into the ink. When I came to Rabbi Akiva, he forbade me. So kasha shimush hashimush, kasha asra asra. We have two problems. Number one, did he first learn with Rabbi Akiva and then Rabbi Yishmael? Did he first learn with Rabbi Yishmael and then Rabbi Akiva? Number two, was it Rabbi Yishmael who forbade it, or was it Rabbi Akiva who forbade it? One of them forbade it, one of them permitted it. So bishlama, right, we'll get to later why one forbade and one permitted, and what's the machloket between them. Right now they say bishlama shimush hashimush lo kasha. Don't worry about the fact who did he learn from first, because in fact it was three. He learned first from Rabbi Akiva, then from Rabbi Yishmael, and then back to Rabbi Akiva. So it's all a matter of which two parts you're talking about, A, B, or C, right? A and B, or B and C. Okay, what stages? And now let's see why. And this is another if we had the first plug for learning Daf Yomi was about the women and how things might have changed from then, here's our second plug for learning specifically Daf Yomi. Okay. Rabbi Akiva. First, he came before Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva was a very, very smart person who had very deep insights and what happened. He couldn't handle it. He didn't understand it. He was going in very deep and he didn't understand the basics. You can't go deep without understanding the basics. Now, other people might argue with this, right? This is a push for, right? Learn everything first. So what did he do? He went to Rabbi Yishmael, Ugamar Gemara, and he learned all the traditions. He learned, right? All the Gemara, whatever you call Gemara was in those days, but he learned everything there was to learn. And then Hadar Ate L'Kamei Rabbi Akiva and Sarasvar. Then he could start getting into the deep understanding. Because without having the basics under your belt, it's very hard to get to more in-depth learning. So there you have it. Again, not to say everyone agrees with this, but it is an interesting point. But ela asara kasha. But so you can understand why maybe he first went to Rabbi Yishmael and then first Rabbi Akiva, then Rabbi Yishmael, or first Rabbi Yishmael, then Rabbi Akiva, because there were two stages here. But, or whatever, two moves. But what about the fact that in one case Rabbi Yishmael forbids it, in the other case Rabbi Akiva forbids it? Well, kasha. We have no resolution to that problem. Tan. Now we're going to bring another braitot with a machloka between two tannaim about what Rabbi Meir held. Rabbi Yehuda Omer haya Rabbi Meir, and this is probably after this happened. Omer haya Rabbi Meir lakol matilim kankatom letoch hadio. When you're writing a sefer Torah, you can put kankatom into your ink. Turning now to Amabet, chutz mi parashat Sotah bilvad. Just that section on the Sotah, you can't. When you get to Bamidbar Hey, that section about the Sotah has to be written in ink that can be erased. Because why? Because you could potentially use that to erase in the mikdash. Rabbi Yaakov Omer Mishmo chutz mi parashat Sotah shel mikdash. No, Rabbi Yaakov says in the name of Rabbi Meir, you can write your entire Torah in that ink that doesn't erase. But when you're writing that special cloth that's going to be used in the temple, which wasn't part of a sefer Torah, then that has to be written in ink that can be erased. But a sefer Torah can't. It doesn't need that. Why? My benai, what's the difference between these two tannaitic opinions? And this would also explain the difference between whoever forbade and whoever permitted. It's a machloket. Are you allowed to take a section from the Torah to erase for the Sotah? That's the debate between them. When it comes time, let's say I'm a Sotah and we need a text. Can I take it from a sefer Torah or do I have to write a separate text? If you can take it from the Torah, then the Torah, obviously that section has to be written in something that could be erased. If not, then the sefer Torah could be written in ink that can't erase. And now they want to suggest that these two are more tannaim who disagree about this. Did they also disagree? Is it the same machloket that we see here? Titania. Is it the same machloket of this? Ein megilatak shera lahashkop sotah acheret. Rabbi Akiva Rabbi Bar Yoshaya Omer megilatak shera lahashkop sotah acheret. If you say you can use the sefer Torah, is that the same as saying that the Megillah doesn't need to be written for the name of this woman? Remember, I told you we learned it has to be written lishma. You can't use this. That's what our Mishna said. You can't use this Megillah for some other woman. But if that there's a machloket tannaim about this, does it have to be written lishma, or can you use a Megillah of another woman? Now, if you can use another Megillah of another woman, then presumably you could use a Megillah that was written in a Torah, because Megillah in the Torah wasn't written for this woman, but so who cares? It doesn't need to be written for this woman. Whereas if you say it needs to be written lishma, you obviously can't take it from a sefer Torah. So right now they think it's the same machloket, but now the Gemara is going to reject it. Two different rabbis on two different perspectives for two different reasons. Amar Papa Dilma Lohi. No, you could say this is not the same machloket at all. When the Tanakama says there that you can't use one woman's Megillah for another woman, maybe he would still say the Torah you could. Why? What's the difference? If we wrote this scroll for Rachel, we can't use it for Leah because it was designated already for Rachel. But a Torah, but a Torah was never designated for anyone. Maybe what it means when it says lishma is you can't take something designated for someone and move it to someone else. But if it wasn't designated for anyone, maybe you could designate it for someone. And that's a Torah. Torah wasn't designated for a particular person. So therefore, you can't necessarily say it's the same machloket. And Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, he's going to go from the other perspective. Dilmalohi adkan lo kama Rabbi Akiva Yoshia hatam ela b'megillah ichtuv l'shumalu ba'olam. When he said you could take Rachel and give it to Leah, he said you could do it because it was written for a Sotah woman. Maybe it needs to be written for a Sotah woman. It doesn't matter which Sotah woman, but it has to be written for Sotah, for alot, for a curse. Aval Torah but a Torah wasn't written to be used as a curse, to be used for this woman to be erased. Torah was written to be learned. Maybe you can't erase it. Okay, and maybe the reason why the Torah can't be used has nothing to do with lishma. Maybe it has to do with some other issue that the Torah wasn't written. You need lishma, but what does it mean lishma? It doesn't mean for this particular woman. It means for the purposes of a Sotah. So therefore, they don't necessarily connect. Now we're going to ask a question on Rabbi Achai bar Yoshia, who basically said, you can use it for another woman, right? It doesn't matter. Rachel was for Leah. So they ask him, wait a minute. But when it comes to get, what? You don't think you need lishma and a get? We talked about this before. You need a get to be lishma. And if lishma you say is, it has to be written for a Sotah. So a get can be written for a get, for a divorce, and then maybe someone could use it for someone else. So do you not hold, do you not hold katav l'garesh d'ishto v'nimlach if he wrote a get to his wife and then changed his mind? And mitzao ben giro, and a guy in his neighborhood sees him. V'amarlo, shmi k'shimcha v'shem ishti k'shem ishtecha. Hey, you know what? I want to divorce my wife. I don't want to spend the money to go to a sefer, a scribe to write this up. You have a document already written. Your name is my name. My wife's name is the same as your wife. Pasul l'gareshbo, he cannot use this. So does Rabbi Achi not agree with this? Achai. Amre hatam v'katav la'amar Rachmana b'inam k'tiva lishma. There it says v'katav la. He has to write for her. That means just for her it has to be written. But by us, what does it say? Where did we get this whole thing of lishma? We finally find out. Here it says hacha ve'asala. It has to be done for her. This is at the end of the section. It says the kohen does for her. Okay, ve'asala ha-kohen et kol ha-Torah. So done. What does it mean done for her? Ma'asiyah. You could say it's mechika. You could say asiyah doesn't mean writing. The writing of it doesn't matter. It's the erasing that has to be done for her. Remember, we had that whole question of it before. Anyway, this sugya suggests possibly he thinks it's the asiyah, not the writing. Now we're going back to this. And I mentioned this yesterday when we saw Rabbi Shimon. Mani Rabbi Shimon. This seems to be Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Why? Because she drinks and immediately we start to see a reaction in her body. Now that would only be if you already did the mincha, right? Why do we know? Because if you don't do the mincha yet, lo bad kalamaya, the water doesn't work. Okay? Why? Remember Rabbi Shimon said it could go in the opposite order. If you did it anyway, it'll work. But how will it work? You'll drink, but you have to bring the mincha. The mincha has to happen. It won't happen without the mincha. The waters won't work. Because the pasuk says there in the Sotah section, this mincha is minchat zikaron, a remembrance. Maskeret, what does it remember? Maskeret avon. It reminds us of the iniquity, the sin. Without the mincha, we don't get reminded of the sin and she won't die. So therefore, if we're worried there's going to be this immediate reaction, it has to be the mincha was done already. And that would only be Rabbi Shimon. But what's the problem if we say it's Rabbi Shimon? So yesterday I said it must be Rabbi Shimon, but we're going to see it can't be Rabbi Shimon. Because Ema Seifa, the next line, is Yesh la zchut hayta tolala. If she has any merits, it will push off her death. Now that is Atan Rabbanan. That's the rabbi's opinion against Rabbi Shimon. Because Rabbi Shimon, if it's Rabbi Shimon, it can't be. Ha'amal. We saw this before. Rabbi Shimon doesn't think that works. Rabbi Shimon thinks you die no matter what. Even you could have merits, you could have done good things in your life. It doesn't matter. You're going to die immediately. So that can't be Rabbi Shimon, the Mishna, because that line matches Rabbi Shimon, but the next line doesn't. So we're now going to say the Mishna is not Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rav Chisda, Hamani Rabbi Akiva, Hida Amar, Makriv Menchatav Achar Kach Mashka, Ubischut Zavala Kerabanan. We're going to say it's Rabbi Akiva because Rabbi Akiva actually agrees with Rabbi Shimon about the order. But about the zchuyot, he probably disagrees with Rabbi Shimon. And therefore we can find a Tana, at least we don't know he agrees with Rabbi Shimon, so we assume he disagrees. Because usually if there's rabbis and Rabbi Shimon, it means Rabbi Shimon's against everybody else. So Rabbi Akiva, when it comes to the merits, thinks that the merits work. But when it comes to the order, he actually holds like Rabbi Shimon and against the rabbis. And then we basically say our mission is not Rabbi Shimon, it must be Rabbi Akiva. Two last things to figure out. One is, they say, remove her immediately, to which the Gemara is going to say, my time. What's the reason? You think it's because maybe she's going to die? Well, then that would say that what? You're trying to say a dead person can't be in the Machaneh Leviyah, which she is, right? Which is outside the Azara, in the Azrat Nashim, and the rest of Harabayit. V'hatanya, it says in a braitot, Tmei Meit mutar likanes l'Machaneh Leviyah. Right? We have a braitot that says, and we already saw this earlier in the Masechet, a Tmei Meit is allowed to go into the Levi camp. How do we know it? V'lo Tmei Meit bilvad, not only a Tmei Meit, someone who came in contact with a dead body, but they didn't only say that. Even the dead person, him or herself. Shenema, where do we learn it from? It says, Vayikach Moshe tatzmot Yosef imo. Remember, we had a whole discussion about this. Moshe took the bones of Yosef with him. What is imo? Imo b'mechitzato. Imo means they were with him where he lived. He lived in the Machaneh Leviyah. So therefore, it's clear you can have dead bones with you. So therefore, we're not worried about her dying. So Amar Abai, what are we worried about? Shematifros nida. We're worried that one of the reactions of her body is going to be she's going to immediately start menstruating. To which the Gemara says, you think scared, fear, right? What happens? It's like a shock to your system causes women to menstruate. Okay, merapia means it softens, like it softens her body to allow the blood to come out again. I don't think that's exactly physiologically what happens, but they use that term to basically say it's going to basically cause her to bleed. Is that really true? They say, yeah, we have other proof for it. When Mordechai tells Esther that Haman's about, right, that Haman did this whole thing and they're going to destroy the Jewish people, it says, what does V'titchalchal mean? Amar Rav, shepirsani da. Rav says she immediately started menstruating. And there you see that could happen. But they say, wait a minute. But we have a different sugya which shows the opposite, which is charada mesaleketami, which is fear causes the blood not to come. It causes a stop in when you're menstruating. Okay, so you might supposed to be menstruating, but you're not going to. Where it's come up, this is in a whole sugya about veset when it comes to regularity. Okay, this comes up in nida, where if you're very regular and yet you didn't see blood, we can assume that you're in nida anyway, and we treat you as if you're in nida. And they say, excuse me, if you're a woman who was hiding though from robbers, or you were scared of something, you were hiding from enemies coming, like there was a war, then if you didn't see blood, we don't treat you as if you're in nida, because that could actually push off your period from coming. So how does this work? One says it could cause, one says it couldn't cause, right? First of all, we know that different people react in different ways to different things, and it could think things that could cause one to bleed, it could cause others not to. But instead, the Gemara answers in a different way, which is pach dat samit biatuta merapi. They have two different types here. They're going to say one is fear, which is an ongoing fear. There's enemies around, and that's just causing you to be scared and you're hiding. That's something interesting. We have a whole thing about hiding when it's on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. Hiding and fear of your enemies is a long-term thing, and that could cause pushing off your menstruating. But biatuta is something sudden. The woman drinks the water, and all of a sudden it causes a shock to her system, which is similar to Esther hearing the news and getting the shock. That could actually cause the bleeding to come. Okay, and that's how they resolve that issue. Next, last thing for today, and we're going to end in the middle here. Yesh la zchut hayta tola. So now, if you remember, the Mishna said it could be, right? And by the way, yeah, just to make clear, because I see some things going on in the chat. What we're worried here is that a nida, I didn't say this before, maybe I should have clarified this. A dead body can't be in the Machaneh Leviyah, can be in the Machaneh Leviyah, but a woman in nida is not allowed to be. That is if you remember, there's zav and mitzora and deb tamei mei. In the Torah, it talks about the tzarua, the mitzora has to be out of all the camps. They have to be totally isolated. The zav, which is like a nida and a zava and all that have the same status, can't be in the Machaneh Leviyah, but could be in Machaneh Yisrael. Whereas a dead body or someone who's tamei mei can only not be in the azara, where, right, that's where the altar is and the heichal, the sanctuary and all that. So if she's nida, that's actually a problem for where she's standing. And that's why they take her out immediately. Now they talked about the merits, and they said the merits could push it off for a year, 2 years, or 3 years. Now they're going to say this Mishna doesn't match any of the tannaitic opinions that we know about this topic. Mani matznitin, lo Rabbi Yossi ben Chanan, lo Rabbi Eliezer ben Yitzchak ish kfar darom, velo Rabbi Yishmael. Okay, now we're going to see their three opinions. Ditanya, it says in a braitot, im yesh la zchut tola la 3 chodashim, 3 months. Hidei hakarat ubar, that's how long it takes till we notice a woman's pregnant. Divrei Rabbi Yossi ben Chanan. We'll explain in a minute where he gets it from. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yitzchak, Ish Kfar Darom, Omer Tisha Chodeshim, Shene'emal, V'nikta v'nizra Azal. Both of them learn it from this pasuk, but they're going to darshan a little bit differently. This pasuk is actually saying if the woman is innocent, she's going to get pregnant. But they darshan it to say, not innocent, but if she has good deeds, Naki is clean. If she has merits, then Nizra Azera, she will get pushed off as long as it takes to Lizra Azera. What does that mean, Lizra Azera? First opinion is 3 months till she's noticeably pregnant. The next one is to say 9 months, because that's how long it takes till the baby's born. Where do they get that from? Well, Ahalan Homer, in a different pasuk, it says, Zera Ya'avdenu Yisupal. Okay, which basically they're going to darshan as Zera Ha'o'oi L'saper. Zera is not just potential for birth. It's someone who's actually been born who could speak. Now, obviously, we know babies can't speak the minute they get out, but that's what they're basically saying. Once they at least have the potential to be able to speak. So therefore, he says 9 months. Rabbi Yishmael Omer 12 chodesh. He says it's 12 months. Even though he doesn't have a proof, he has a reference for it in a pasuk, which we're going to wait with because the pasuk starts here and ends tomorrow's daf. We'll leave that aside. But right now, the question is, one place says 3 months, one place says 9 months, one place says it's 12 months. So yes, the year is found in our Mishnah, but the 2 years or 3 years that our Mishnah says doesn't seem to match any opinion. Okay, so quick review of the daf. There were a lot of different things. So I'm not going to review the whole thing. I wrote a very long summary on the website, and it's in the podcast details or YouTube details. You can read it there, kind of get the real details of what goes on in this page. But to do a quick review, we started with this thing of the braitot. We started with also contradiction of Rabbi Akiva. We resolved the issue of the braitot, the mar in the water. Then we talked about all sorts of stages where the woman would say, I don't want to drink, or admit her guilt. What do we do with everything that's existence already? Then we had this whole thing about the zchut tolala, and then we said, well, that's and the woman in the temple, and then we take her out immediately, and then but if she has merits, and then that led to, should we teach women Torah? Should we not teach women Torah? And then we had this whole thing about, can we take, does it have to be written lishma? Can we take it from a sefer Torah? And the different opinions within that. And then we ended with trying to understand these issues of why we took her out of the temple, and how we ended with this question that the thing about the zchuyot really doesn't match any of the tannaitic opinions about it. That was a very quick summary. There's more to it, but we'll leave it at that. Wishing everybody a meaningful Holocaust Memorial Day.